Walk down a busy street in any major city in Britain and you'll see a rich mix of people from different ethnic backgrounds. Of these, a large number have called Britain home for generations, and some are here to study and work. And then there's the refugees and asylum seekers, here to escape the chaos in their home countries. For Genius Mhazo, a walk in the neighborhood is a luxury he didn't always have. In the 2 years before he left Zimbabwe in search of a new life, Genius, a teacher in his native village, was constantly watching his back.
We were beaten up with sticks, with our hands tied behind our backs, and we had to just say what they wanted to hear in order to be released. Because there were 7 of us, and I'm the only one who survived from that group. Today, I'm the only one who's alive.
Genius was lucky to have escaped. He arrived in Britain in 2002, but it took another 7 long years before the UK border agency granted him refugee status.
It was difficult to provide the evidence that was needed. My application was turned down quite a number of times.
BBC correspondent Peter Biles was a first-hand witness of the situation in Zimbabwe over the last decade.
Ordinary people in Zimbabwe have gone through absolute hell for the last 10 years or so. Food shortages, of course, but also the collapse of the infrastructure, the collapse of the education system, of the health system, hospitals not functioning properly, people unable to get medical attention, and so on. And that is why so many Zimbabweans have tried to move out of the country.
Fleeing Zimbabwe for similar reasons, preacher Muguza arrived in Britain in 2005.
I was an active member of the Movement for Democratic Change from the onset in 1999, 11 September, when we launched it in the Rufaro Stadium. Every weekend I would go out of Harare to reach the masses of Zimbabwe, teaching them and distributing the manifesto of MDC.
In an effort to quell any form of political opposition, the ZANU-PF came knocking on the door.
They abducted me, they picked me up from my home, then put me in a prison for 3 days and released without no charge, but after beating, interrogating to say, why are you opposing the government? And when you tell them, they continue beating you. That's where I got this scar on my left ear. And after all those, I would come after having been beaten under my feet, because it doesn't show any marks.
Zimbabwe has been politically dominated by Robert Mugabe and his ZANU-PF party since independence in 1980. The land reform policies implemented by the party throughout the 1990s resulted in the collapse of the economy and caused widespread discontent. To stay in power, the government began intimidating people for forced support, and thousands of Zimbabweans fled the country. He may have escaped immediate danger, but Preacher doesn't know how long it'll last. Unlike Genius, he's still waiting for refugee status.
It is because of the culture of disbelief in the Home Office. When I went to the first tribunal hearing, I was told that my story was too good to be true.
Genius and Preacher are not the only ones. Many refugees wait years, through rejections and appeals, before receiving a final answer. It's been 5 years, and Preacher says the waiting is difficult.
Having been an accountant in Zimbabwe, and for the past 5 years I've been in the UK, I haven't been able to work. I have just been sitting idle, and Home Office taking time to deliberate my case.
Refugee and migrant justice have been providing legal services to asylum seekers since 1992. It was given the Liberty and Justice Human Rights Award for its work with Zimbabwean asylum seekers.
We could, without much money, have a much better asylum system than we have at present. I think we need to put much more resources into what happens when people first arrive and apply for asylum. We need to ensure that sustainable initial decisions are made.
During the wait time, asylum seekers are not allowed to work.
From the day of application up to the day when I got my refugee status, it took about 7 years. Your life is sort of at a standstill, and during that time, you cannot plan for tomorrow.
Satvinder Jas has studied migration and refugee issues for 20 years and has written extensively on the subject.
There is no evidence that refugees or immigrants take away jobs. There is plenty of evidence that refugees and immigrants create jobs and fill in jobs that the mainstream population does not want to do.
Jonathan Ellis of Refugee Council, a UK-wide organisation that provides support to refugees, agrees with this approach.
What's really important is end-to-end benefit support. So for the duration of an asylum seeker's stay in the UK, they should be entitled to some degree of benefit support. But actually far more important than that, I think, is the ability to work. So asylum seekers are pilloried in the tabloid press for taking benefits, and yet we deny them the right to work. You know, they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
I think it's quite difficult to assess how many have actually been the victims of political persecution and how many are simply economic migrants. But clearly many people have thought there was a very good reason to seek a better life abroad and to leave Zimbabwe, and many people have left Zimbabwe.
There has to be some evidence which can point to there being a credible claim. Now that credible claim is at a lower standard. It's not on the criminal standard, it's not at the civil standard, it is at the lower standard. The system also allows for a positive role for doubt. So where there is any doubt, that has been interpreted in a positive way. So the ground rules are actually quite favourable for refugees. Very often governments don't interpret them in quite that way because they interpret them far too strictly.
Immigration officers go in with the mindset that asylum seeker is wanting to kind of present a fraudulent story. So there's a culture of disbelief.
Officials start from a premise that people are not telling the truth. You know, surely in this system of our legal system, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Often with Zimbabwean refugees, what we've had is people who have come, through no criticism being made here, for reasons of economic betterment, and who wouldn't from that part of the world where the country has perhaps the lowest mortality rate in the world.
Genius and Preacher have hopes for the future.
I think a lot about my country, and I would really want things to change there. And while I'm here, I've learned a lot on how people's human rights are upheld. If you go into another place and you compare with what happens back home, you realize that there is a lot that is being done there that is wrong.
I would want to reunite with my kids and probably make up for the time that we have lost. If you are to look, my DNA is in Zimbabwe. I can never find it anywhere else in the whole world. And Zimbabwe will always be my home. And this is why you find I'm still involved in the struggle.
Change is coming, but it's very slow, and it's always 2 steps forward and 1 back. We saw the signing of the power sharing agreement with Morgan Tsvangirai and Robert Mugabe in September 2008. It wasn't until nearly 6 months later, in February 2009, that they actually implemented that agreement. And even now, there is still a dispute over many key issues.
Not a big change has happened in Zimbabwe. So there is that fear, there's that constant fear that something might happen to your family, or there's something that might happen to you once you go back.
You held me, you kissed me, then a bright light came. Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Genius and Preacher are but just 2 faces out of thousands, and not just Zimbabweans seeking shelter in Britain, the hope of returning home a distant dream. But for now, life goes on, even if in a state of limbo.
mukadzi wangu wakaitema kuwa ndikamurova ini. Pandakamurova ndakamuripa mombe nembudzi mbiri.